Everybody has their own reasons why they start their healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do it for their own satisfaction. Some people do it for closure. Some people do it to start a brand new chapter in their lives. What prompted you to start this healing journey? What specifically happened to you?
Absolutely. So what started this project was the need to start a community of individuals that felt or had been into a similar situation as mine. So mine's alike. During COVID, I had a breakdown just like many of us out here in this world. And the second time we came across a COVID diagnosis, I was at my parents' and being confined with 5 other people was incredibly difficult. Where, some of my family members ended up in the hospital, intensive psychiatric help. I was probably close to that as well. And so I checked in myself with a therapist and I said that I needed to do something about what I was going through. But at the same time, I felt like I wanted to be intentional. And I said, I really need to do something different this time. And so I went through a year of therapy. And eventually I reached a plateau where my therapist was ghosting me because he felt like he couldn't help me anymore. And so I, at the time, was working with the hopes and dreams of building a podcast, but I just didn't have the content. Like, I didn't know what to talk about. So the girl that I was working with, the podcast, eventually became my life coach. And she and I talked about what I was going through. And she referred me to a rest coach, which is basically a packaged coaching session that has hypnosis. And so I went through a couple of sessions that allowed me to really put back a lot of those very elemental components of depression. I was able to move what is now trauma or traumatic episodes that were being initiated because the way I felt is I was in a survival mode. I keep going back and forth. I couldn't evolve past the emotions of abandonment and wanting to run away from wanting to quit my job every 6 weeks. And it was just not normal because I had an amazing team, an amazing job. It was an amazing opportunity, and I was being triggered by things that just didn't make any sense. So I needed something different. And to say the least, I went through 5 sessions of rest, which we'll get the opportunity to listen to what that is through some of the episodes and what that modality works as. And then I started working on self-actualization. I literally just repackaged and I said to my coach, I said, I'm ready for this podcast. This is what I want to do, which is just navigating through conventional and unconventional methods of mental health with the goal of building a community that had people that had experienced the same issues as I did and wanted something new. We want to try something that is outside of just going into a session, which I didn't condemn. I just needed more. And so I opened a matchmaker.fm looking for people who would be interested in recording. I started playing and I got swamped with people from therapists, licensed therapists from across the US and Canada. And we will get the opportunity to really look at those from therapy all the way through ayahuasca. Or is that how you pronounce it?
Wow. Let me first thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was a lot at once. Let's break that down a little bit.
Yeah.
First, going back to your COVID story, I can actually relate to that. This is not something that we spoke about. During COVID, my father was in ICU. He was dying. And he was there for about 10 days. And we got kicked out of one hospital, sent to another hospital because they didn't think that it was serious enough, to the point where I brought him home to die. And then eventually he did get better. And I spent 10 days crying over him. And so I can understand where you're coming from, that COVID shook my world upside down. And so that was a catalyst for whatever else was going to come. And so thank you so much for sharing that with me. I know that it must be difficult. It's difficult for anybody to share personal issues with complete strangers, especially on TV, on the radio, in person. So thank you for that. Now, I think it's great that you reached out to a coach to help you with that and to a therapist, because I know many people struggle with accountability and taking the first step and actually saying to themselves, I have a problem and I need help. Otherwise, you go on this repetitive swing and you keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you so much.
I think why I asked that question is that on my personal healing journey, as I'm going through it and as I'm experiencing, I'm finding that it goes back way more than I thought it did. I thought that it started in my 20s, and then I thought that it started in my teens, but really it went further back. So the fact that you had acknowledged it during COVID and COVID was your catalyst is very commendable.
Thank you.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more what the experience was like during your therapy while you were in COVID?
Yeah, I actually was really intentional about going to therapy this time around because I wanted to make sure that it was with intention and with purpose. And so I looked for a therapist that came from the very similar upbringing as mine. It's very important to really seek validation and finding a therapist that you can identify with. I think shopping for a therapist is like shopping for a boyfriend, or it's really like a dating game.
That's funny, shopping for a boyfriend.
It really
If
is.
only it was that easy.
Well, they say that, about 50% of your connections with therapists will be valid. I agree with that. Sometimes when you're trying to find somebody that you can work with, it takes a couple of trials. So I always encourage people to find a therapist, and if they were discouraged by the person they connected with, then maybe it was not a good match. And so I find that you need to keep searching. So when you're searching for a therapist, have a couple of names. Look at their demographics. Are they male? Are they female? Are they, for myself, a person of color or Latinos? For me, it was a man who was close to my age, second or first generation Latino. So he comes from immigrant parents. So when you're dealing with, first generation parents that perhaps may have a different value set as someone that may be here 3, 4, 5, 10 generations and may not have the same struggles, a lot of times there's definitely more compassion over your story versus a critic. I'm sure you have found yourself in a therapy session where your therapist is telling you, "Well, why are you doing that?" Or why don't you let your dad go? It's not your responsibility to be a caregiver. Live your life, which you are. But to say the least, there are some values set in there that we value our attachments to our ancestors and to our parents, and that is who we are. And so we need somebody that we to talk to that shares those values. Whatever that is. If you're a person that joined the circus and you need somebody to validate the fact that you're nomad at age 40, go for it. That's what you really need. So my experience through that therapist was very validating in that sense. We went through the things that I was dealing as a codependent person, and allowed me to really navigate and understand firsthand what those struggles were because he went through them. He didn't have to share them, but he went through some of those struggles with his one of his parents. And so eventually, I think I also felt that at the end of the road, a year into our sessions, that I needed something more and I wasn't getting what I needed. And he said, you need to experiment with other things. And so we looked into life coaching, which I do have a coach. We looked into EFT, I believe, and tapping,
Mhm.
which are some modalities that I still have to play with. But it was really enriching to really find someone that I felt connected to.
First, I want to thank you for providing me and your listeners with so much valuable information. What I found interesting is that being a woman that has experienced trauma, pain, all sorts of things, you chose a man. Can I ask you before we continue why you chose a man?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't purposely find or search for a man. I think when I ever need something, I kind of put the request out to the universe, if you want to say that, or some of us pray. Um, I didn't really say I want a male, 40 to 42 that is first generation Latino. No, it was more like I saw a Spanish name, I read his profile, let's go with it. I was open. Now, I will tell you that sometimes I purposely choose men over women just for the concept of hearing different things. If I connect with them on a professional, like in a client therapist relationship, I'll stay. If I need validation from my own trauma as a woman, then I will do that. I think it was just random.
Well, first of all, I think it's great that you tap into your intuition because intuition is awesome and so is the universe. Um, it's interesting that you chose a man. I am the opposite. I will always, if I see something written by a man and it has something to do with how a woman feels, I will close it.
Mhm.
Because how can a man know how a woman feels? Not to say that a woman knows how a woman feels, but I'm more inclined to listen to a woman's perspective on women as opposed to men. So that's not wrong, but I just think it's quite interesting that you chose a man. I find it more interesting that you wanted someone that understands where you came from, your roots, which I can relate to quite well because, yes, you're right. I did have therapists and people in my life who told me, it's not your burden, carry. Put him away. My own sister said that. Put
Mhm.
him away. It's so easy, right? We're going to just put people in the garbage when they're old or sick, like a worn little shirt, right? A child doesn't fit them anymore. What do they do with it? They throw it out. You cannot dispose of people,
Absolutely not.
right? We're not disposable.
Mm-mm. And we talked about this before. I don't know if you remember that, you being a Jewish woman, we
Right.
talk about how many of our generations have survived through the sense of community. And Western world can be very seductive and very singular, but it's also very cold. And I think the one thing that has made us survive and thrive through trauma and through repression and oppression and discrimination and Holocaust is a sense of community.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because right now there's a war in Israel.
Mhm.
And once again, the Jewish people have to fight for their own. And this has been an ongoing pattern throughout history. And no matter who tries to bring us down, we always build ourselves up. And so I'm sure you can relate to that as well. In your culture, it's like that too. Even in society nowadays, you're not seen as the American woman. You're seen as the Latina woman.
Mhm.
And you have to prove yourself every day. And when does it ever come to a point where you no longer have to prove